Thank you so much for having me, GLIDR. This is a really cool idea for a meetup. And thanks for picking this beautiful space. Sorry the view isn't very good. No, it's a beautiful, beautiful view. So what I do at Chromatic, John explained it very, very well. You know that thing that big companies do when they build products that no one actually buys or wants? We basically fix that. We fix that at the product design level. So we coach teams to pair with them as almost like an interim product manager, helping them iterate on their business model ideas on a weekly basis for 3 to 6 months, say, at a time, with the goal of kind of leaving them in a sustainable place so they're running it on their own. We teach people how to not launch things that nobody wants at a training level too. We run a lot of workshops. After we started kind of coaching teams, other teams heard about that coaching and they said, hey, we want to learn about interviewing customers, or we want to learn how to rapidly prototype our ideas. So we started doing workshops and trainings, and then eventually the kind of stakeholders or leadership of those teams were looking at us and saying, hey, how do we scale this out across all of our departments? So the 3 things we do, again, coaching teams, training lots of people, and designing programs for innovation ecosystems, whether in the private or public sector. So yeah, and I guess my role in that is I'm really a coach. I consider my day-to-day as designing and running and teaching modules. Whether that is, again, in the context of, all right, you're a team and we need to get this product out to the market as fast as possible to see if it works or it doesn't. Or if it's designing a workshop for a room full of college students, whatever it might be, everything in between.
Great. So I think that in general, one of the things I want to kind of build into this series is just sort of an understanding of like how people get to product, right? And I think that people take different paths, and some of those paths are super interesting. And I think you have an interesting story that led you here, and it was not necessarily the typical story. So can you share a little bit about that story as well?
Sure. Yeah. So I'd say it really started when I graduated college. I went to Davidson College, Steph Curry University, and I graduated with a religion degree. So like any good religion major, I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself. I had very supportive parents who were like, religion, awesome, go for it. And I was like, thank you, it was really interesting. I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. So one thing that I was very passionate about was education. I was very passionate about education at an early age. My first work was in welfare schools in New York City, working as a teaching assistant. And I ended up, after graduating college, working in the outdoors industry. So living in a tent for work, taking kids who did not want to be out in the woods, and basically working as a part of a treatment team to help these kids who had behavioral issues and learning disabilities to kind of get back on track, as it were. Fast forward about a year and a half, I, along with a friend of mine, Sachin Dugal, did a quick 180. Well, he wasn't doing the 180 as much as I was, but we started talking about these ideas that we had for starting a business. Now, my context for being an entrepreneur was, at this time, running student clubs in college, running like book clubs when I had graduated college. Nothing really too formal. But Sachin, the software developer, he said, look, I have some pretty strong convictions about a business I want to build, and I need someone scrappy to do everything else. Like, I have no idea how to do everything else, but I'm definitely scrappy, so let's go for it. So we moved to San Francisco. This was end of 2012, beginning of 2013, and started Chodo. And my introduction to, or I guess my education of being an entrepreneur, was really landing in San Francisco and just finding people who, as a good friend Ken over here actually knows very much about this meetup. We met very, very soon after I had moved here. I started going to different meetups. The big one I went to was the Lean Startup Circle. And meeting people who are entrepreneurs trying to use lean principles in their day-to-day. I said, wow, this is really interesting. Let me try and bring that into my own startup. And that's kind of what the next 2 years was me and our founding team working on running experiments iteratively to figure out what Chodo would become. Fast forward to, say, beginning 2015. I always thought that was silly when when people would say, what year was that? Was it 97, 98? Of course you know what year it was, but here I am, I forget the year. So 2015, I decided that I amicably parted ways with my co-founder, mostly because I felt that I wasn't 110% invested, as anyone should be when they're at that stage of a startup, raising funding, building a product, trying to get users fast. And I was really passionate about teaching, still passionate about entrepreneurship. So I set out to look for something that combined teaching and entrepreneurship. I met someone named Tristan Cromer, who is he's kind of one degree away from Eric Ries, if you know that name, Steve Blank, who was kind of working very early on with those folks. And I said, oh, well, you teach entrepreneurship. I want to do what you're doing. And one small project together led to bigger projects, and eventually we moved away from his personal brand and founded Chromatic. That's where we are today.
Cool.
From living in a tent to working on a laptop.
So I want to go back to Shoto for a second. Shoto, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm always concerned that, especially with GLIDR, right? GLIDR doesn't have an E, and that's and so people are always unsure of how to pronounce our name. So I'm always really aware of making sure I get that right. But the early days of that, as you had the idea and you came out here and you're at these lean startup meetups and stuff, how did you apply that? And what was the early sort of development of the idea and the early discovery that you were doing? What was the nature of it? Did it work? Did it not work? Are there any stories you can tell us about that?
Sure, a lot of stories. In short, the first 2 years of Shoto was not the prettiest. I was very young at the time, very, very grateful to have a co-founder who had been through this journey before. But as we soon found out, every journey is unique, and we were met with a lot of challenges that neither of us were really prepared for. I don't know, my first steps were very grounded in practice. So when I went to these meetups, these Lean Startup Circle and other various meetups around the city to meet entrepreneurs who were using these techniques to start their own businesses, what I found was that there were a lot of people who were willing to sit down and say, well, what experiment are you running right now? Let's just review that right here. Oh, hey, I have an experiment. Can you review this? Let's hold each other accountable to running iterations on our product ideas. So I think that kind of speaks to how I started applying some of the things I was learning. Some of the specific stories, Shoto, our original vision was to build a suite of apps that better organized our digital lives. So if we had documents, photos, movies, we wanted to kind of surface those at relevant times in our users' lives. What it turned into was this, focusing on a use case, photo sharing. A lot of that focus was informed by these principles of, okay, well, don't try and drown in ideas, don't try and tackle everything at once. Focus. I think one thing, if I were to go back to month 4, month 5, I would have tried to throw out ideas faster. I think that was one mistake that we made, was we said, oh, well, we're going to focus, except when we decide to focus, that's it. Sort of like, has anyone heard of the tool of a business model canvas? The business model canvas, if you haven't heard of it, it's like a one-page visual tool to describe the business plan for your startup. However, the business model canvas is best used when you fill it in, and then next week comes around, you tear it down, and you fill it in again. What have I learned that makes my business model different? We put up the business model canvas right on the wall and didn't touch it for a long time. So that was one of the early mistakes. But yeah, it started off as kind of a larger set of use cases. We focused in on hey, can we help end consumers smartly gather photos that they and their friends took at different events and resurface memories. This is kind of pre, I don't know if you're familiar with Carousel at Dropbox, certainly pre-Snapchat. We were just interested in how people shared those digital assets.
Yeah, honestly, it's a problem that's still not solved. So hopefully the show will continue to solve that. So we were talking earlier, and John and I were talking today, and so I know a lot of you guys have experienced running experiments and doing research and discovery, but we were talking about the value of running really shitty experiments. And so Maybe tell us about some of the shittier experiments that you ran, so to speak. Like, and also like why it is valuable. I know you were saying earlier you thought it was valuable to do that, and there's a reason to do that. That's not something you should try to avoid. So tell me a little bit about that. Maybe if there's a story you can share about a particularly bad one, or one that you learned from because it was so bad.
Well, I'd say that point certainly is way more crystallized now than it was before. When we're coaching teams at Chromatic, my goal in that first session, working with a team, is to try and identify what's holding them back from getting in front of customers and failing fast. All right, let's remove that and just get them outside, or get them in front of real people. So in that way, shitty experiments, if that's what it takes, go for it. If someone tells me, hey, I think I have this assumption, in my head I'm like, no way. No way is this experiment going to yield what you're saying it's going to yield. That doesn't matter. I say, all right, design the experiment, go out and do it. And they'll inevitably come back with some look on their face like they saw a ghost, and it's like, oh, I learned so much from my customers. Like, great, that's the efficacy in what we're trying to do. It's just getting out and doing it. So one story I can think of, it actually is shitty in some ways, really, really powerful in other ways. We had this idea for a feature that we wanted to build in Shoto. It was kind of like a master button. Anyone seen Ready Player One or Read Ready Player One? The button at the end of the movie? You know what I'm talking about? Like a master button. So what it was is we wanted to test this feature. Click a button. Basically, you connect your local library to the app, and you click a button, and it automatically shares every single photo in your library with the other friends you had on the app who were at those events. This sounded like an interesting proposition. One click, share it all. Get your friends to do it. You get a lot of photos yourself. So what we did was we launched this feature, and 100% of people who saw the feature did not engage with it, and in fact had some very choice words. Oh my gosh, I have some private photos. I'm concerned those would get shared, and how do I know what's getting shared with who, and da 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 da. So that was the shitty part. The good part was that when we launched the feature, it was on pen and paper, and we were walking around the park, basically simulating the experience of being in an app. Something I guess you could call it pressure testing or stress testing. Although stress testing is a different application. Called pressure testing. We basically ran this little pen and paper test, put people in the experience of having all their photos blasted out to all of their friends, and elicited a pretty negative response. Something that, again, in hindsight seems kind of silly. Probably could have expected that, but we ran the experiment anyway. Found out with pretty strong gut feeling that, you know what, this is enough to invalidate our assumption that this feature would work. So it was, we probably could have thought about our assumptions a little bit more. We probably could have storyboarded it out. We probably could have, I don't know, just had some quick conversations first. But I think finding a way to just, pen and paper the feature, come up with a script that effectively brought these strangers we'd never talked to into the experience of actually sharing their photos with friends, allowed us to just get that shitty experiment out and really, really fail.
Yeah, so it sounds like that was actually a pretty successful experiment at the end of the day. Because how much did you spend on it? Do you remember?
An afternoon.
Got it. And so, from a cost perspective, it worked out. I also remember, and some of you guys may have done this, I think one of the things that I've noticed always is the difference between some larger companies that have really large user bases to draw from and some scrappy startups is the park experience, right? Mm. So how was it, and would you recommend I have done this in the past. We were building an app that was also like video sharing related, but for kids. And so we were approaching parents with their kids in the park. So we had to wear like Art Berkeley t-shirts so we looked like we were not just like creeps in the park. But it's a really awkward experiment, but we learned a lot doing that. And is it something you'd recommend? Is it something you recommend for larger teams to do, or is it just something that you think scrappy startups can afford to do?
I absolutely recommend that for everyone to do. I mean, if you are not even on the product team, if you are at a company that is serving real people, go out and meet those real people. I think that the role that empathy plays in product development is often not touched on in online courses or in certification classes, whatever it might be. But it's such an important part of building real value. I think that if you are not sure what to do and you have a little energy, just go talk to someone about your idea. Go learn something that you wouldn't have otherwise learned. I mean, it's amazing the blind spots that we are unaware of that get uncovered by just having a conversation with someone. And I realize that I'm pretty extroverted, so those engaging with people comes a little bit easier for me than maybe someone who is more prone to sitting quietly with a book to recharge. But I think once you go out there and kind of get into the rhythm of interrupting someone from their day, giving them complete permission to disengage with you at any time, and then saying, hey, if it works out, I'd love to talk with you for 10 minutes about an idea that I'm working on. It's a really, really powerful way to get learning about your business. I would recommend it for everyone.
So you seem like you were, yeah, go for it.
Sorry, just one question about like audience and who you're testing with, especially in like your shitty park experiment. So like how do you validate that those are the right people, that you actually care about their opinions, that they represent your user base? So
there are lots of ways to do it. The tool that I've used most in my career is just generative customer interviews. So I'll usually start with some sort of prototypical customer on a piece of paper. What are their needs and goals? What are some observable behaviors that I can see or ask about to confirm they have the problems I'm trying to solve? What are some demographic facts? And at first, those start off as a bunch of assumptions. I was actually working today with a company that is, they're just starting this journey, and they said, well, we think our customers they buy probiotics regularly. I was like, great, that's enough to get started. It might be totally wrong, but it's at least enough to go, you can probably figure out where people go to buy probiotics. Maybe you can go on a blog and a natural health blog and message those folks, hey, would you like to talk with us, or go to GNC, or actually, I don't really buy probiotics, I don't know. They'll have to figure that out. But I think starting with just some assumption, go out there and test it, and then come back and don't leave the business model canvas stuck to the wall. Rip it down and update it with what you've learned about. You'll slowly start getting a sense of, all right, who has the problem? Who knows they have the problem? Who's actually looking for a solution out there? Who has budget to solve the problem? That might just be time or energy or resources and other resources, also literal budget. And lastly, who's actually trying to solve it themselves? Eventually, enough customer discovery interviews, if you're onto something, you're going to find people who are like, oh my gosh, I've tried, I've made so many spreadsheets to manage my personal finances, and you're telling me there's this app, Wealthfront, that'll do it for me? Like, great, awesome.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the value of speed versus quality, right? It's always that balance that I'm thinking about. Like, I don't think you can ultimately get to quality just through speed alone, but sometimes you can really get a good leg there by just getting out, doing a lot of them, and at first you're talking to the wrong people, and you realize they're the wrong people, but you realize why, right? And then you ask that person about somebody else, and then you eventually find the right person and the right fit, and those things iterate. And so it's really about how fast can you get out of the door, I think, on some of this stuff, literally or figuratively, depending on what you're doing. But it also sounds like you were kind of an evangelist in this world and gravitated to this type of work. I can relate because I came from an anthropology background, so I'm fascinated by talking to people in parks. But did you have a team that was like a super willing counterpart? So was Sachin was he like, yeah, let's definitely do this, or is he more like, no, I want to build this stuff and like, here's the thing we're doing, and I want to ship this?
Yeah. Varied week to week. But I would say that that's something that is going to be hard for anyone who is trying to do this, is if you're out there on an island, put it this way, I mean, being an early stage startup, everyone is busy all of the time. And it is very difficult to be busy on the right things at any given time. You just stay busy and you hope that you're hitting the mark. When you're actually running experiments like this, it can feel very easy for the team to say, well, you go run the experiments, bring the data back to us, and we'll all make data-driven decisions. But what happens is I go outside of the building, I talk to some real people, I empathize with them, I have that, oh my gosh, I saw a ghost look on my face when I come back, I share the data, and I say, no, we've been thinking about this all day in the office, we're actually going to do it this way. And it's to no fault of any of ours. I think it's much more a breakdown of the process than anything else. One thing, if I could do anything differently from day one at Shoto, it would be bringing everyone out to those parks. No matter what. Every single day for 2 hours. We could give 2 hours a day for talking to real people about our product ideas, right? That's what I would change. Because I think there were plenty of times where I had very strong convictions that were grounded in a couple of dozen conversations I had just had over the previous 2 weeks. And those convictions are kind of, nah, we're going to do this because it feels like the right thing to do. And I don't want to discount the many ways that startups can find success. Sometimes those features were right. Sometimes I erred on the side of over-experimenting. Sometimes I was just like, all right, we need to go talk to more customers because those were the tools that I was familiar with. And meanwhile, Brian is sitting there like, actually, I think I can hack together this feature in an evening and we can test it live tomorrow. Oh, okay. I didn't even know that was possible. So, yeah. In a roundabout way, I would say that it wasn't always successful bringing the team into this way of working. And that's one thing that I would definitely do differently is push for everyone to be in front of customers, especially at that early stage.
Okay. Is your question?
Yeah. At what point during the customer development process did you know that you can now take the idea forward to market?
That's a tricky one. There is, I would say, no kind of silver bullet answer to that. For Shoto, it was when we found patterns of people asking us to use the solution. There's one kind of interview framework that I would use and still use now. It's, let's go talk to someone and first ask if they have a problem. Okay? Once we've heard someone say, oh yeah, I have this problem, let's try and understand the impact of that problem. Right? Maybe I'm talking to a single mother of 4 living in a rural part of the country, let's say a rural part of Vietnam. Not very good access to clean produce. Problem. Impact? Medical bills, kids missing school, have to work multiple jobs, a lot of time away from family, right? So problem, let's understand the impact. If someone had a seriously impactful problem, then, okay, well, let's confirm that they are trying to solve it right now, and only then are we actually going to maybe show them the solution. Once we had a pattern of people saying, oh, that solution does solve my very impactful problem, right, and work backwards on that ladder, then we said, all right, it's worth building this feature. The actual numbers, we weren't very empirical, we need 25 people to say yes, right? It was more just, are we hearing enough people to feel comfortable at this point launching this product? At some point, you're going to have to take a risk. At some point, you're going to launch a feature that is not going to work. Like we launched an events feature. We had a friend who was having a wedding soon, very excited to use this events feature. We had walked him through the wireframes and explained how the app would work. We didn't really test it with the wedding visitors. We just tested it with the groom and the bride, and they were super excited about it, but the visitors had a lot of issues using it, didn't want to use it in the way that we had designed it, and long story short, it was a pretty big flop. That might be a shitty experiment. Just going to big scale way too early. Big scale for that being a wedding, formal event like that. So sometimes we miss the mark, when do we launch a feature or a new version of the product, but generally speaking, we were looking for that pattern. Oh wow, I just heard 10 out of 15 people today say that they confirmed that our solution will solve the real problem that they have, and that is very impactful.
How do you prioritize your assumptions?
Ooh, very good
Can you guys repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was how do we prioritize our assumptions? I live in a 2x2. So I guess being a consultant, there's lots of 2x2s out there. But the 2x2 that I live in, what it does is the first thing I do is I try and frame any of the assumptions and risks that I have as questions. Questions that are very actionable. I can take a question and say, without using buzzwords like experiment or MVP or landing page test, I can just say, well, hey team, what are we going to do to go answer this question next week? So first thing I do is I frame them as questions. Then I prioritize by figuring out which of these questions are going to be easier to answer or harder to answer. I'm always going to prioritize speed over precision. We don't really know what is the right assumption to test. It's better to just go out there, get some feedback from the market, and then let that inform our priorities. And so first thing I prioritize on is which is going to be easier to answer and which is harder to answer. And then I try and figure out which is the bigger risk. If you think about the core job of an entrepreneur in an early stage, it's not to scale a business. That is, I think, a very common misperception of what an entrepreneur's job is. An entrepreneur's job is just to survive, right? That's it. Right? And so their day-to-day becomes then not about thinking about the potential upside of their project. Oh my gosh, how am I going to get my first million users, right? Instead, it's like, all right, what can I do and afford to mess up on? Like, what can I afford to lose and stay around to do something else? So I prioritize the risks in that way. Which of these are company-killing risks, right? Big impact, and which do I know less about? And if I kind of multiply uncertainty times impact, well, that's a pretty big risk that I should probably work on sooner. If I am also, I don't know, if I'm sitting with a product team and they're like, well, what's the website going to look like? What's the website going to look like? And it's week 1. I say, well, how much impact is that going to have right now, and how much uncertainty is there? We could probably spin up a landing page that looks like our competitors that we know does pretty well, and great, there's not much uncertainty there. There's not much that will probably trip us up when we actually have to build it. So in summary, I'm a bit of a rambler here, but in summary, prioritizing what we're working on. What's going to be easy to test? Take the hard ones, chunk them down, make them easier. And then anything that we know less about, higher priority, and anything that's going to have bigger business impact if we don't answer that question, higher priority. It does feel weird prioritizing that way because there are probably some very easy wins that are kind of lower on the ladder of prioritization that you're just going to have to ignore. Or things that would feel like easy wins. Like, all right, let's put up the landing page. That might feel like an easy win for someone who's used to web development. However, business day 1 probably doesn't need a landing page. Probably just needs you to get in front of real people and talk to them, empathize with them, understand what their problem is. So yeah.
So I'll add to that a couple of things. I think, like at GLIDR, we generally think of like assumptions. Like all of our ideas for features are also assumptions on day 1. So and it's a very similar process. There's multiple ways, and so like at different stages, I think you also use different things. So where we're at, we use impact, like ICE scoring. So Sean Ellis's ICE scoring, like impact times ease times competence level. Which tends to be pretty good as at least an early way to understand like which features, assumptions we might actually like do more research and discovery on to figure out if it's the case. That generally doesn't answer the question for us, but it helps us just sort of say which of these things of these various ideas that we could work on, would we work on first. And then I actually heard a story from an entrepreneur who recently that was really interesting. So he was out raising money and kept asking himself like, why do I not want to put my own money in this right now? Why would I not invest my own money? And each time he would answer that question, he would ask himself that question, all right, like, why would I not invest right now? And he would actually have some stake with himself about like a real feeling that he should. So I thought that was an interesting story. And that company actually, he scaled it up and ended up selling it. It's a company called Shipwire, and they do like logistics.
Yeah, just to tack onto that, I think that often what's left out of the prioritization discussion, especially at an early stage for an idea, is the people risks. When I'm working with a team and we're brainstorming our assumptions, one of my favorite prompts is, what's bothering you right now? And I try and get the team to think outside of their product and just like, all right, well, I don't know, I'm a little hungry, under-caffeinated, and you start thinking about these other things that are very real obstacles to developing a good product. Like, what's bothering me is I just find it really hard to get out of the building and talk to customers. It's like, great, that could be a huge risk for your business. That could ultimately kill your business, something we should really consider. So anyway, I like that the colleague in your story was getting very real. All right, why am I bothered by, why am I not investing my money? Let's get very concrete, very real.
So I noticed that you actually called yourself a chief storyteller. Was that the title I noticed? Why was that?
Well, first, we all have very funny titles. I think I don't know why the Sachin, I think he was chief wizard. He was really into being a wizard for some reason. My storyteller title though did have a foundation in my day-to-day role. And really, if you boil down my job description at the startup, it was to be an advocate for our users. At every stage of company building and product building and customer development was to advocate for that user's perspective, which meant knowing their stories, which meant empathizing with their stories, which meant at times trying to relate to those stories and experience them. I think being chief storyteller was just a funny way to remind all of us that it was someone's explicit role on the team to kind of always be that customer touch point. I was doing the customer support when we finally had enough users that were asking us questions on Zendesk. I was running all the customer interviews, bringing people in to do usability testing. So that's kind of the foundation of where the name came from.
So one thing was on my mind when you were talking earlier about the need for people to be as close to the customer and actually out seeing the reaction of the customer to some of these questions. What about existing product teams? Product teams that are in large organizations potentially working on some pretty large projects with user research teams. And maybe this is going to lead us into the chromatic conversation a little bit, but what's the recommendation there? Does the product team and the engineering team really need to be out in front of the customer? Is it members of that team? How should that come together in your mind?
Yeah, so to start, I think it's important to think about how companies, large companies, actually structure innovation initiatives or innovation teams or departments. Often what big companies will do is they'll say, oh, innovation is really important. I'm going to take all my high potential employees and move them onto innovation teams. And these employees are coming with a lot of baggage. They're coming with the MBAs, the understanding of how things run in a corporate environment. And so they're seeing a kind of process as a proxy for people. They see the process of, okay, let me talk to the customer insights team that is a big, giant machine. Let me tell them I need this survey. Let me pull it out. And okay, now I understand my customer because I have the spreadsheet of responses from 500 anonymized people. So to try and combat that anti-pattern, one, I think at an organizational level, innovation teams do not need to be very big. They certainly can benefit from having access to a lot of resources that a big company might have, but the teams themselves do not need to be very big. Sometimes when I'm coaching a team that has, a customer insights a researcher, a designer, a developer, business development, a salesperson, everyone is coming into that first meeting just siloed in their own roles. And they're thinking, all right, how do I use my tools to help the project? When in reality, we might not need the tools of a designer right from the get-go. So I think that, not to beat a dead horse, but I don't think this horse is dead at all, but getting people out in front of customers will get them face-to-face with what the customer needs. Coming back, from these conversations with customers and doing some value stream mapping. Everyone familiar with value stream mapping? Raise your hand if you're not familiar with value stream mapping. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I saw a lot of blank stares. I wasn't sure if we were being quiet. So value stream mapping, the idea is that we try and discern between value-added jobs and non-value-added jobs. If you think of a value-added job, this is something that came from auto manufacturing. Think of a value-added job for building a car as putting the wheel on the car. And that is something that if you don't do that well, the customer is going to be a little upset. Now, non-value-added jobs are like bringing the wheel from this side of the warehouse to the assembly line. The customer doesn't really care how you do that. It's probably not going to have a huge impact on the end value proposition. So we would go out in front of customers, come back, and do some value stream mapping. And based on the problems they're talking about, what do we need to do right now? I found that to be somewhat successful, but I'd say the one of the reasons that we at Chromatic at least have positioned ourselves as coaches is we recognize the biggest obstacle to innovation of our organizations is at an individual experiential level. It's taking an engineer who's been used to having projects thrown over the fence at them for 10, 15 years and saying, all right, now you have no project plan. You have to close your laptop, you have to go talk to customers, and that takes a little while to get used to, working in that different way.
Questions? So as we move on from Shoto, because we're kind of blurring into the Chromatic experience now, which is really interesting. What do you guys? It seems like a lot of the work that you guys are doing is around the concept of discovery and discovering the right products to build. And so oftentimes, and tell me if this matches your thought process. So I always love new frameworks, but in general, we oftentimes at GLIDR at least talk about there really being software teams are really working in between two different things, right? Like the realm of discovery and then the realm of delivery. And delivery is where all the focus has really been. It's agile, et cetera. And then Lean Startup is just the newest branding around discovery of products. Product teams, really great product teams, we've noticed have spent a lot of time in discovery. So how do you guys think about discovery? How do you define it? And how do you guys relate to the concept of discovery or Lean Startup?
Yeah. I think this is certainly not my phrase, but I think of the difference between agile and something like design thinking or Lean Startup as an agile framework, which is a software development framework that teaches you how to build the thing right, or it gives you a process for building the thing right. That discovery stuff, we think of it as building the right thing. How do we know what is the right thing to build? So first off, getting buy-in from a team on hey, that discovery is actually pretty important, starts with, all right, everyone, story time. How many times have you at your business launched a product that failed? Why did it fail? And more often than not, it's because, it wasn't because we couldn't build the thing right. I'm forgetting the guy's name now, but there's a really great corporate innovation program that was founded at Adobe called the Kickbox. And long story short, the person who created this innovation program, kind of open source ideas from Adobe, he was speaking at a conference, and he was saying, when we were developing the Kickbox, there was never any doubt in our mind that if someone had an idea that was good, we could build it. That was never the risk. If we have the idea, we can build it. Almost becomes a risky part for other businesses, but another story, right? What he said was the biggest risk for Adobe was figuring out what to actually build. It's very easy to just drown in lots of ideas and say, well, we can build that, so let's build it. So I think it starts with kind of getting that buy-in, understanding the impact of building the wrong thing versus building the thing wrong. And yeah, I'd say actually we were just talking before this about how when I was at Shoto, and I think this is typical for a lot of companies, it was very difficult to describe who the customer was. Kind of always changing a little bit. At Chromatic, we have a very clear understanding of who our customer is. If someone gets on the phone and they say to us, hey, so we've been through this agile training, but we're still launching the wrong products. It's like, okay, we know exactly the experience that you've been through. You read some books, you read some literature, you said, oh, we got this. We're going to do agile training. We know exactly what to build. Turns out you launched the wrong thing, and now you're knocking on the Chromatic door saying, well, actually, we understand that discovery is pretty important. Can you coach us through that process?
So how did you guys get there? So if we actually just think about that for a second. So you said you basically know early on who's a customer, who's not. Your funnel is converting pretty well, I think. And so how did you guys get to know your customer well? Was that just a long period of trial and error? Were you running targeted experiments? Was it a mix of both? What are some things you've been doing? What worked and what didn't work along that journey?
Yeah, it was definitely a series of experiments, but I'd say it started with a lot of focus. We, as a team of former entrepreneurs ourselves, we found one of the easiest ways to start engaging in corporate innovation or with startups themselves was as almost like mentors. And mentorship turned into coaching. Coaching, being contracted by an accelerator program to work with all of their startups, or being contracted by a big company to coach one team. And as we were coaching, we realized that, other people in this space are interested in what we are doing with this team. Why don't we run a little test and basically a sales pitch to the person who contracted us in the first place, say, hey, we can also do this at scale with lots of other teams. Then we started doing workshops. After doing workshops, workshops have a little bit more visibility in large companies, and so all of a sudden other leadership were coming down and they're saying, hey, this is really interesting stuff that the people coming out of these workshops are excited about and doing. I wonder, can we work together to build a kind of scaled out training program for all the product managers in our multinational company? So for the first few years, it was really only coaching. And a very few number of workshops. But I think by sticking to the level that we felt was the riskiest, right? Where was innovation breaking down? It wasn't breaking down because the CEO didn't stress it enough in their strategy reports or whatever. No, it was breaking down because you had people working on these projects who were not empathizing with their customers, who were building features that they probably shouldn't have, or not understanding how to do proper retrospectives. And so I think by starting there, staying focused on what the biggest risk was, we started seeing a business opportunity and kind of scaling out that. There are a lot of people in our field who focus much more on strategy consulting, and I think that's great. I mean, eventually we found our way to doing that as well. But I'd say what makes Promatic really stand out is that we started and always will stay at the level of the product developer. Like, what do you need to do to actually build a good product?
Okay. So those people that are building great products, let's go there for a second. Who are they? Are you guys working? So like, what's your customer archetype? Are you working with software teams? Are you working across industry verticals? Like, what kind of products are you working on?
That's actually, so eventually when we started getting more inbound requests than doing outbound marketing, a lot of our customers started popping up from kind of industries that are ripe for disruption. We'll call these kind of more traditional industries: financial services, insurance, fast-moving consumer goods, manufacturing. And so a lot of the kind of like, oh yeah, I started Shodo, it's a mobile app. Everyone's like, how is that relevant to me? So the companies that we work with are building a wide variety of physical and I guess more often physical products or policy-based products, or working on process improvement internally, not even a product necessarily. So working with them has been certainly a challenge of kind of translating the principles that work for software-based companies, companies that are born out of kind of like .com era and after. That was definitely a big challenge. I think I'm straying away from the question though.
No, I was really just wondering who the customer was there.
Yeah.
And I think where I was going with that was thinking about how does the concept of discovery, because I know that a lot of us work across different industries. I'm assuming usually in most cases there's lots of software developers and software teams in any room in San Francisco talking about product. But how do the concepts and the various practices of discovery transfer across various types of products?
Yeah, I think as far as discovery techniques, it's all pretty much the same. When it comes to actually prototyping out an idea, that might be a little bit different. So discovery, it's I'm still able to work with teams who have great data mining tools at their fingertips. They can go out and run ethnography, right? Go sit down with their customers and just observe what the problem is. They can still go out and do customer interviews. But when it comes time to mock up a solution, their solution is maybe more like, all right, well let's design some packaging, not fill it with the product, and let's go test with this, right? Let's go do some value proposition testing with that, as opposed to launching an app on test flight or something and testing it on an iPhone. So that's where I think we've had to get a little creative, is bringing how do we translate the fast-paced testing when it comes to testing digital products to testing packaged goods or insurance policies. That's been interesting. I never expected to get interested in like regulatory sandboxes, but now if anyone works in corporate innovation, you love regulatory sandboxes. It allows you to move faster. So yeah, the customers are a wide variety of people. The teams, again, sometimes a company looks at their kind of employees and they say, all right, I'm going to grab all the high potentials. And then you have a bunch of people who are in a coaching call, like, I've never done product development before, but marketing, so, how can that help? It's actually pretty rare that we work with a team of engineers. I'd say at some of our bigger clients.
There any, just to make things concrete, because I always like the stories. I feel like a lot of the value in is kind of locked up in the stories. There, and it may, because you guys are in consulting, the answer to this maybe no, but I always like to dig a little bit. Is there a story you can tell us about one of these projects, and maybe something that was particularly interesting, particularly successful, particularly unsuccessful, in terms of the process that they were running? Maybe I'll let you decide whether it's successful or unsuccessful, but just an interesting sort of end-to-end experience and the results they're seeing.
Yeah, actually, one story kind of sticks out. It was unfortunately I don't have a visual to show, but it's a very funny visual. So this company that we were working with was a startup, small startup. They're based in Vietnam. 2015, I spent about 3 months in Vietnam running a training program for aspiring startup coaches and accelerator managers. And one of the startups I ended up working with as a result of being there, they were selling these coconuts. Supermarkets were pretty new in Vietnam at the time. There weren't too many big chain supermarkets, and they said, all right, we're going to bring coconuts into the supermarket. And when I said, okay, that sounds awesome, how are you getting the word out there? They said, oh, we have this website, come check it out. I looked at the website, and had they not told me that they were selling coconuts beforehand, I would have had no idea what the website said. It honestly looked like a dating app. They were telling the story of a man meets a woman, and somewhere that was grounded in the birth of a coconut, and it was very confusing. So we ran something called a comprehension test. Are anyone familiar with a comprehension test? This is a good technique that I've brought to a lot of teams, and this is where I think there are a lot of specific stories of running powerful comprehension tests. Basically, all right, let's take your website, show it to someone, and don't prompt them, just show them the website, pull it back after they've seen it for 15 seconds, pretty long time for someone to visit a website for the first time, right? So pull it back when they've seen it for 15 seconds and ask them to repeat it back in their own words. Very, very, very simple experiment you can run to evaluate whether or not people comprehend your value proposition. Surprise, surprise. They got a wide range of answers, none of which were, oh yeah, you're selling coconuts in supermarkets. So we kind of focused in, and basically the easy one was putting a big giant picture of a coconut on their website. And we saw the comprehension rates of their value proposition really increase, and it gave them a little bit more confidence in drafting up marketing material that they were selling to the big stores. And so that's one story that was pretty funny, and also just shows the power of running very simple, quick experiments. I mean, those comprehension tests can take you, again, an afternoon.
Yeah, the whole concept of comprehension tests, if you guys have not run comprehension tests, one of the funniest things that you can do is, and I'm sure you guys know in marketing, you go out and you run ads to test value propositions, and you get really weird. I've just come into the teams and seen really weird stuff come back from that, and it turns out that no one actually understands anything you're talking about, and so I think it is really good first step to remember every time is get some people in a room, have them be able to basically tell you what your value proposition means before you go out and test all those different iterations of your value proposition. Otherwise, you are definitely wasting your time, and it's a very awesome reminder at all times. It's a step that it's a harder step to take sometimes, it feels like, than just running an ad and seeing people click on it.
Oh yeah, I mean, conversion is exciting. When you put up a website or when you're doing sales, converting a customer is super exciting. I want to do everything I can to convert that customer. But if you launch a landing page and you're converting customers, you don't really know why. Well, then what's the point? What are you actually learning? You're not going to be able to take that experience and scale it out and help your business in that way. So I think the comprehension tests will kind of confirm for you, oh, this is what people are thinking about when they land on my website, or when they hear my sales pitch, or when they hear the elevator pitch of my company. Great, now I know what I'm working on. Really, really powerful task.
So I realize we're getting close to time here. So before I open this up, this is a question I like to ask in all my discovery interviews. What should I ask that I have not asked here?
Yeah. Very, very, very great closing question. And as I'll do in a second, normally people don't answer that with a list of questions. Normally they'll just keep talking and you just get to sit and listen. I think that if anything wasn't covered in full, a lot of things ran through my mind. I would say, I don't know, raise your hand if you are actively working on an idea right now. Okay, a few people. Raise your hand if you know you want to work on your own startup idea at some point. Okay, about half the crowd. If the others feel so inclined to do that, one thing I'd say is the prioritization question that you had asked. Rating things on kind of like easy and hard. I think that it's really, really, really powerful to actually be able to empathize with your end customer. If you have an idea, you don't need to do anything more than just go start talking about that idea with people. And the experience of doing that can tell you more than any litany of going to meetups or taking classes or anything like that could tell you. And I don't know, I think that in that way, one thing that I really love about the kind of work that we're able to do is we're able to work within the constraints, a very wide variety of constraints. I've had people join a call and they say, all right, yeah, I'm really excited for the next 10 weeks of working with you. I'm like, great, how much time do you have on this project each week? They're like, oh, probably 2 hours a week. I'm like, well, it's not going to be 10 weeks working together. It's going to be like 2 days. But you can work within the constraints that you have to go out and discover if your idea is a good idea or not. Just don't be shy. Just go out there and put your idea out in front of someone. It can be very uncomfortable, but I think the best product developers are those who can kind of get comfortable being uncomfortable and not get afraid of kind of taking their baby out for a walk and hearing people say, ooh, that's an ugly baby. Right? The best product developers take their baby out for a walk and they say, okay, well, why do you think this is an ugly baby? It's more good.
It's an ugly baby. Like, let's be honest. This is what I always tell people. It's like, don't be afraid of being wrong. You're definitely wrong. You're 100% wrong, right? You actually are not 100% wrong. You're definitely wrong. You're just not 100% wrong, probably. And you just need to figure out which parts are wrong and how much that percentage is. But the baby is ugly, and it's a process of just figuring out why and letting it grow. Because they're not wrong. So I think that's a good way to put that. As we close out here, any other questions? We'll be around for questions after this, and happy to talk about individual cases, as I'm sure Nick is as well. Love to do that. Question?
Yeah, so Nick, I'd be curious how you distinguish between the discovery call and the sales call.
So especially when everyone familiar with B2B versus B2C? I'm going to talk in a very B2B business model context, right? So I'm assuming here when you say sales call, kind of a B2B type sales call. One thing that, drop the microphone there. One thing that I like to stress to teams that are working in B2B business models is that customer discovery is sales. The process of learning about someone's problem is the same process that you will go through in a scaled up sales funnel. So distinguish, I actually don't really distinguish very much. Going back to, I think it was a question that you had asked, going back to that kind of like, all right, let's discover a problem. Let's try and understand the impact of that problem. Let's see if they've confirmed verbally to us that it's valuable to solve that problem. Okay, then I can switch into the typical sales call. Hey, I've got something that you want. This is how much it costs, right? But I need to go through that discovery phase first. So I guess maybe I would distinguish, if I'm talking to someone and I have not gotten confirmation that they have a real problem they want solved and that they have done something to try and solve it in the past, then it's a discovery conversation. As soon as I get that confirmation, ask permission, hey, mind if I sell you something here? And then it becomes more of a sales call, I would say. Quick funny story about that. I did not distinguish very well early on. After I left Shoto, I was working on a few small projects with the guy I mentioned earlier, Tristan Cromer. And one of those projects was actually, Ken over here knows this meetup well, as I mentioned earlier, the Lean Startup Circle. I was running an experiment to try and get sponsorship for the Lean Startup Circle. We identified one persona type as kind of consultants who were coming to the meetup, and we thought, hey, they might value chipping into this meetup and keeping it alive because we think that they find some of their work at this meetup. So I started calling up. This was literally the first time I had done these calls. I might have even called you, Ken. And I started calling up the other consultants and saying, "Hey, you want to pitch in for Lean Startup Circle?" And that is almost how I opened. I was not distinguishing at all. I was like, "All right, we need people to sponsor, so I'm just going to call them and ask them to sponsor." And there's one guy I called. His name
Sure
is.
you're not from Boston?
So what?
You sure you're not from Boston?
I'm definitely not from Boston. Big New York sports fan, actually. But there was one guy I called. His name is Sean Murphy, and he's an amazing startup sales consultant and does a lot of work actually with another lean startup related meetup, lean startup in the enterprise. And he is a very frank individual. And before I could get out my opening sentence, he's like, "I am not the person you're looking to talk to, and absolutely no, I will not spend any money on this meetup." And then he proceeded to actually grill me on why I was asking the questions this way. And I'm sitting there, well, you know, I just want to find sponsors. And he's like, "Well, you definitely didn't find one here, so why are you doing this?" And it was just, it was a really good lesson to again, kind of remember that always start with discovery. Once you know someone actually has a problem they want solved, okay, find a pitch. But yeah, that was a crash course in how to not do sales, I think.
Great. Any more questions? Excellent. Thank you guys, and thank you, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.